So if you're sitting here in this room right now, you must have asked yourself the question at some point what the blank is going on. Now, what's in that blank is probably different for everyone, but that's okay. So we are in good hands here today with Cindy Wigglesworth. Cindy is the author of SQ21, 21 Skills for Building Spiritual Intelligence. And we are so fortunate that she is a member of this community. We've been blessed by her wisdom, her compassion, her own commitment to her own spiritual growth, as she said today, and figuring out how to meet these times with equanimity and wisdom and compassion. And she's going to give us all the answers for how to do that today. Is that right?
Yes, in 2 hours, all the answers.
Yeah, woo, we're going to have this thing figured out. So please join me in giving a very warm Unity welcome to Cindy Wigglesworth.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Stacy. Appreciate it. And my beloved community here at Unity, I'm so grateful to have you all as members of my community and as my friends. So thank you for being here. As I mentioned at the beginning of service, if you were there, this workshop, in a sense, has been 10 years in the making, because I've been asking this question for a long time. And maybe even further back than that, but certainly for the last 10 years. But I have put many, many hours into trying to condense complexity into simplicity. You've probably, if you've talked to people who are teachers or public speakers, it is much harder to write a short speech than it is to write a long one. Because a long one, you can ramble around and throw everything in. I was trying to condense this to make it as useful as possible. We will be recording today, and we do have a live streaming going on. So whatever you say, just be aware that the world can hear you. And it will be shared via recording in case anybody really enjoys it today and wants to share it with other people. If you are watching via live stream, welcome to everybody. The folks here have a paper handout. You can obtain that handout by emailing kross@unityhouston.org, and that's on the flip chart over there, kross@unityhouston.org. And for everybody here, if you've signed in the back and put your email address, Carrie Ross will be emailing you a PDF of the slide deck in case you want it. If you don't want it, you can just hit delete. But you will get a PDF of the handout and a PDF of the slide deck. She probably won't do that until after next Sunday, so she gets everybody both slide decks, both handouts. All right, are we ready to rock and roll? All right, let's figure the world out. We will be taking a restroom break about halfway through, just in case anybody's worried about that. All right, let's go. All right, I'm going to begin as your tour guide. And you are a soul. You've been deciding where you want to incarnate. We've been floating around the universe for a while. You've been checking out various destinations, and you've pretty much locked in that Earth is your next incarnation. So, congratulations and welcome to your tour of Earth. Now, when you first get here, it's going to be very confusing. It's going to feel like time is this big old jumble that makes no sense, you know? It's like nothing is going to feel right. It's going to be like all this confusing input, and your brain's going to be fried for a little while. And that's okay. And then at some point, you're going to start noticing a pattern where things seem to be linear. You're 1, and then you're 2, and then you're 3, and then you're 4, and so on until you get to my age where we don't say what we are anymore. So you're going from A to B. It feels linear. And yet you may notice through the course of your life, certain things seem to be repeating, you know, like a circle. You're going around and around and around. Certain things seem to happen again and again. Whoops, wrong direction. You'll also have to learn how to use a clicker. After watching the circle for a while, you may notice it's actually a spiral staircase, that there is an up and a down, and you're free to kind of go up and you can go back down. So it's more complicated and yet more elegant than where you started. You started with this big jumble, confusing mess. Then it seemed linear. Then you thought, well, some things look circular, and then maybe some things look like a spiral staircase. So you'll start learning about all of that. You're also going to have a whole lot of other fun. You're going to get to experience duality, male, female, and maybe in-betweens, You're going to experience up and down, good and bad, north and south, all kinds of dualities will show up. We'll talk more about that next week. You're going to feel like you've jumped into the middle of chaos, and yet there will be from chaos sometimes the emergence of order. We'll talk more about that next week too. There will be moments of growth. There will be moments of decay. There will be new growth. There will be lots of emotions: fear, joy, sadness, love, grief, hundreds of emotions that you'll get to experience. Isn't this a great tour? Didn't you pick a good assignment? You're going to be jumping into complexity and paradox where a whole lot of things don't seem to make sense. How can this and this both be true? And yet somehow they are. You're going to be occasionally quite confused. You'll find yourself in conflict with other people or with reality because reality doesn't line up the way we want it to. And you'll get to experience not only your own birth and death, but you will be part of the birth and deaths of other people that you care about and of other systems that you care about. So you get all of this as part of your tour package. You're going to forget, at least your human part will forget, everything that I've told you, but your soul will remember. So I'm telling your soul these things now so you can remember it's some part of you. But in order to be human, the human part of you has to forget. You're going to launch into many experiences. You will experience rainy days and storms, and if you live in Houston, some hurricanes. You will experience blue skies and sunshine. It'll all be part of your life experience. Sometimes you will be a person who is a doctor, a nurse, a caregiver of some sort, a helper. Sometimes you will be the person who needs help, the person who is sick and is needing someone to come and heal you. Overall, it's quite the roller coaster ride. Sometimes the coaster gets stuck. You might be left hanging upside down, wondering what? Sometimes it'll go fast. Sometimes it'll go slow. Sometimes you'll do loop-de-loops, and it'll be leaving you nauseated and dizzy, like maybe right now. So life is going to be quite the ride. Up, down, sideways, slow, fast, start, stop. But when it's all done, you'll get your angel wings back. And when you get those back, we're going to have a party. We're going to celebrate all the great stuff that you learned during your tour on Earth. But in the meantime, welcome to Earth. Now, just by show of hands, did that resonate with your heart for any of you? For a lot of people in this community, this is a familiar sounding spiritual perspective. It may not be universal. Everybody listening in the whole world may not agree with it, but it is a perspective. Now, what's important about a perspective is it brings meaning to a situation, to a story that you're experiencing. So we are all experiencing some stuff right now. Is this a helpful perspective inside the stuff that you're experiencing in your life? Maybe it helps me. Every now and then I say to myself, hey, you chose this tour, honey. You signed up for this trip, and maybe I'm here because I want to be here right now. Maybe I have something to contribute. So that is a narrative that helps to bring meaning to difficult times. And it's a narrative that's worth making conscious. If that fits for you, you can make it conscious. All right, we're going to be going through two particular other theories that I think will be very helpful. But if I'm going to summarize at a super high level, what I will tell you is that I believe we are in what we might call a chrysalis time. This is the butterfly not yet out. Make more sense as we go through this model. So when you realize that there have been previous moments in American history and in human history where we have hit a tipping point and an era is about to change, it has always been hard, uncomfortable, ugly, disconcerting, disorienting, all that stuff that we're probably feeling these days. It's unique right now in that this time is not exactly like any previous time. And the fact that there are historians who have seen a repeating loop, a repeating cycle, that's a pattern from the past, not a guarantee for the future. What creates the future, what emerges, is what we co-create together. And that's where next week is going to be particularly important when we talk about how can we be islands of coherence that help create a better outcome from the chaos and not a lesser outcome from the chaos. Dark things are coming to the surface. If you have any social media or access to the news, you're probably seeing a lot of stuff that some days you just have to turn it off and not pay attention for a little while because it's overwhelming. What is the point of dark things coming to the surface? I believe that it is part of the shadow of humanity coming up to be healed. If you think of it like an infection in the body that has accumulated some pus, you have to puncture the wound and let it out before it can heal. The more you bandage it in, the worse the infection gets. So it's not a very pretty thing to think about, but it doesn't look good, it doesn't smell good, it ain't no fun. But what it can bring about is a new level of social cohesion and a new order that will be fantastic if we put our soul energy and our human energy together to make that happen. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So that's the summary. Now, here is the life cycle of a monarch butterfly borrowed from this company, thoughtco.com. And I would say, well, let me just explain the circle here. You start with the eggs that become a caterpillar, that becomes a pupa in the cocoon, and it turns into goo. Some of you know, I think it was Barbara Marx Hubbard used to talk about we're in the goo. When you're in your spiritual transformation as a personal growth moment, you're in the goo. We're in a collective goo. And we're somewhere between goo and butterfly. And then the butterfly, once it's ready to come out of the cocoon, has to struggle its way out. And I remember reading about a scientist who loved these butterflies and was studying them and noticed that this one butterfly could not seem to get out of its cocoon, so he took scissors to it and clipped open the cocoon, and the butterfly's wings never completely formed because it didn't complete its struggle. And I always thought that was such a beautiful metaphor for the journey. It's like some things we have to do, and it has to be hard. And the hard part is the part that makes us strong and new and beautiful. It's the struggle that pushed the fluids into the wings that made the wings expand so the butterfly could fly. So it's possible we're somewhere in the goo to butterfly transition. The historians we'll be looking at would say we're really pretty close to here. So there's good news. Hey, we've been in the goo actually a long time. So we may be actually close to coming out of the goo. And then we get our time in the sun as a butterfly, and guess what? The cycle starts over again. So that's where we're headed. Now, I'm going to talk about two different models today. One model is called the fourth turning, which I'll be going to initially. It is a simplification of history. Every model is a simplification trying to explain something. As soon as you say, here's a model of, you're dealing with a simplification. As soon as you're dealing with a simplification, you're leaving things out. As soon as you leave things out, it's an imperfect model. And yet we need these models. Like if I were to give you a map of Houston that showed every pothole in every street, would you ever get where you are going? No. So we need a simplified roadmap to help us get from any one point to another point. So this is going to be a simplified roadmap. If you read their books, they have simplified history. I've simplified it down to like a 30-minute chunk of this session, which is like grossly unfair to the two authors. So I have given you in the handout the information about the books, which I would encourage you to purchase if you find this interesting, or borrow from the library. And there's a ton of free info out there. You can just search on the internet for the authors, one of whom is still alive. Neil Howe is still alive. We're going to talk about another model after the break called spiral dynamics, also a fantastic and useful model. So we'll get to those two, but they're both incomplete, but I think they're super useful. All right, so here's the first one. It's called The Fourth Turning. The original book by Strauss and Howe was written in 1997. The follow-up book is by Neil Howe because William Strauss has passed, and his second book is called The Fourth Turning is Here. The subtitle is What the Seasons of History Tell Us About How and When the Crisis Will End. Yes, please. Yes, please. All right, so here is the basic idea. The most simplified version of the idea is to think of it as the four seasons. We are currently in winter, which they also call the crisis, right? According to them, to Howe actually, this started in 2008 with the global financial crisis. So Bush was still in power, Bush Jr., W was still in power when the financial crisis began, and then Obama was elected president. I will tell you, Neil does an unfortunate bypass over issues related to Obama awakening a shadow of American consciousness that we will address. Don't worry, we will get there. But it's not in the model. It is a historical model, not a psychological model, but the model doesn't work if you don't factor in human shadow dynamics. So we got some shadow to clean up. It's part of that infection coming to the surface. We will get there eventually to talk about it. But sticking with the model, we start in 2008. Now, their model says that each of these four seasons take about 20 years to complete. About. So a whole cycle takes about 80 years, 80 to 90. Some of the seasons are less than 20 years, some can be more, but it helps to have that as a container to think about. So about 20 years. Well, that would take us to 2028. We're at 2026. So we might not be done, but we might not be far from done with winter. Now, what comes after winter? Spring. Spring is also referred to in their model as the high. He's estimating 2028 to 2030, but it's a guess. You never know until you're looking backwards, right? When you're looking forwards, it's just a guess. But it tends, based on history, to happen quickly. Like once things start to coalesce at the end of a winter, it tends to coalesce quickly. Whether it coalesces into a nice, functional, next evolutionary growth moment or into something dark is really kind of up to us as a collective. So we do have a piece in steering that. And I'll walk you through some samples to get you more comfortable with this model. The next season will be summer, which should happen at about 2050. I don't think I'll be around to see it, but some of y'all have fun with that. And then fall 2070. But the last fall, which then fed into our current winter, according to this model, began with Ronald Reagan. Okay. So you can look at the cultural changes, you can look at the historical changes through the lens of this fourth turning model. Now, the little footnote down here says they studied Anglo-American history predominantly, but since World War II, since it was so vast, involved so many countries, a lot of countries' times sort of reset with World War II. All right, so we'll look at that because that's one of our winters. So here are some previous American winters. The first one was the American Revolution. I highly recommend the Ken Burns Revolutionary War documentary. Fantastic, it's a whole series. It is helpful to me in that it takes away some of the too pretty way it was taught in elementary school. Like, you know, there was this tea party and they dumped a bunch of tea in the ocean and then a few people shot at each other and then we had, you know, ta-da, we had a new country. It was a little too easy, a little too quick. It was actually a really hard time, and it really was a civil war in the sense that people who lived in the colonies were divided brother against brother, who was a loyalist and who was a rebel. So it was actually way more complex than how it was taught. So it was helpful for me to watch that series. I recommend it. The second winter we have experienced as a country, and obviously I'm skipping over this whole, we colonized and took this land from native people to whom I apologize forever and for always. Right? So American history tends to start with, yeah, Europeans got here. Okay. That's a whole different problem, another shadow to be cleaned up. But in terms of the model, it begins with the American Revolution. The second one is the US Civil War, North versus South. Again, a complicated history, devastating, brother against brother, sister against sister. The third winter was the Great Depression and World War II. That was our most recent winter. And I remind you, you're welcome to all of these slides. We will be sending these out as a PDF. So you're welcome to take photos, you're welcome to take notes, and we will be sending them out. So the Great Depression and World War II, that winter ended in 1946. And we went from there into a time of really amazing equality of opportunity with a burgeoning middle class, which has been declining since the boom after World War II. But we had a huge explosion in the middle class in the couple of decades following this. The current one, as I mentioned, started in 2008, and we're still praying for the ending to show up, as long as it's a good ending with a nice spring. We want a nice spring. All right, here's a little more detail on the model and the seasons. For winter, they call it the crisis. It can come early or late. It can be brief or severe. It cannot be skipped. You can't get through to spring without the goo part, which is unfortunate, you know? And I think this was one of the most helpful parts of this model for me, because I just wanted to undo the sad stuff. Can't I just hit backspace delete and get this part over backwards, go back to when we were being nice to each other? But if we're honest, we've had simmering issues in our sociology for the entire time this country's been here, and we keep trying to clean it up. This is the next wave needing to be cleaned up. So I actually don't want to rewind, I want to go forward. But it was helpful for me to make that mental commitment that I'm not trying to go backwards. I want to go to better, not backwards, better. The mood in winter is always angry. There's a lot of civil tension. There is a phrase called social cohesion, which shows up in multiple models. These are not the only people who list that as a crucial factor. When people are coherent, that means they're, not everybody, but mostly agreeing to similar social contract. Like, this is how we take care of each other, these are our values, this is how we govern ourselves, we agree to limit the power of the powerful, we agree to the rule of law, things like that. So you have high social cohesion. When you get to winter, you start losing social cohesion, which is a very painful feeling. And if you've been hearing or saying, this doesn't feel like my country anymore, that's probably why. Part of why is that we have sort of lost our sense of shared value, shared vision, shared commitment to a social contract. Real hardship has to appear during winter. There's no escaping it. I'm hoping not for World War II level of hardship, but we are experiencing hardship, and it is falling predominantly on the least privileged people in this society. It can bring an apocalypse, or it can create heroes. Generally in our history, it has created heroes. So we are hoping, and it's not a person, it's a upwelling of energy. It's a sense of a heroic generation coming forward. And it brings the seed of spring, and hopefully we start facing some shadow stuff that we need to face. So spring, they refer to as the high. It's upbeat and optimistic after decades of depression. So yay, can we fast forward? Can we get to this upbeat, optimistic stuff? I know we can't fast forward, I know, but I would like to get there. 2 years would be great, 2030, I'll take that. We get a sense of shared purpose and values again. We get a sense of social cohesion again. We invest in the structures and institutions that will support social cohesion and that will help our social contract be enacted. One of the social contracts post-World War II was everybody gets education. If you are willing to go to school, there's a public school for you. And in the college level, there are public colleges, and they didn't cost that much. And there was the GI Bill, not fairly administered, another problem, but there was the GI Bill that enabled many people to go to college. So there was more equality of opportunity in that springtime because there was more of a sense of a shared social contract. So I'm hoping that is coming next. Institutions are strengthened to make sure that things get done according to the shared values. The rule of law, the courts, the United Nations was created, the World Bank, all of these are flawed organizations, but it was an attempt to institute a structure to support a new value system. Individualism tends to go down and community focus tends to come up during a springtime. Civic order is restored, yay. Yay. Now, those of us who are boomers, we were born post-World War II, born in the spring. We come into our adulthood in the summer, which is called an awakening period. Spiritual awakenings happen. Hippies, the 60s, the 70s, peace, love, and granola, civil protest, marches, civil rights, women's rights, the Black Panthers, Martin Luther King Jr., Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnam protests for gay rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we boomers, yay, we're part of this summer. This is very disconcerting to the GI generation who's like, we fought and died and you guys are out here marching and protesting. But this is the way it's gonna be, okay? So if you're young enough to be around for the next summer, brace yourself. There will be spring and then there will be summer, and that generation will tell the people who are currently in leadership all the things they're still not doing right. And that's how it should be. There were some violent times. We had assassinations of JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., RFK, Stonewall Inn in New York City, the Kent State shooting in Ohio, and the Jackson State shooting in Mississippi. So we tend to forget that we had our own era of federal government killing people for protesting back at this time as well. During the fall, this is called the unraveling. The unraveling is a pessimistic mood. And I remember 20 years ago wondering why all the young people tended to be so pessimistic. And it's almost like, I'm still boomeritis, and the young people were perceiving things that the older people didn't want to see. And so I think they were tuning in to things are about to change and it may not be pretty. You guys have been messing up long enough, boomers. I can't tell how many times I've heard on TV, the boomers. But they perceive weakening institutions, which is in fact what's happening, civic order beginning to fall apart, culture wars and meanness characterize this period for us, and politics grows hateful and uncompromising. Ta-da. All right, so those are the 4 seasons. A little recap. US previous winners, American Revolution. What they say was being built was a sense of national identity. We were part of England. We belonged to King George. The sense of separating from that and forming a new identity was psychologically and sociologically huge. We decided we would be our sovereign selves and had our own authority separated from the king. This was big. The Civil War, big stuff. What was being built, who's a citizen and who's not. We still don't have that right. We're still working on that. But the definition of who is a citizen of the United States of America versus the Confederate States of America was the hot debate. Who's in charge and what's the moral foundation for the republic? Are we or are we not going to have slavery? Being the single biggest moral question. The Great Depression, and World War II, what was being rebuilt, a whole lot of things. The Great Depression showed that we needed different economic rules. We needed a social safety net because people were starving. And we needed to have a different global order when we got into World War II. And unintentionally, but reality was we emerged as the global leader from World War II. I don't think anybody entered that war thinking, oh goody, we can be a global leader. Pearl Harbor happened and we woke up and said, we got to quit sitting on our hands, we have to get involved. So pain, real pain, has to be involved in these winters. And here we are back at our current, which we're not entirely sure what's being rebuilt. We are definitely looking at what constitutes legitimate authority. What is the meaning of democracy? Do we even mean it anymore? Does a vote matter anymore? And what is the relationship between the government, the citizen, the technology? I know there's a lot of stress around social media and AI and privacy of information. And what about capital, the US dollar, Bitcoin, and all these other things? There's a lot reorganizing right now. All right, so let's look at our current cycle. How are we doing on time? I'm trying to make sure I don't get behind. So looking at the crisis cycle, this is the previous one. They break it into 6 parts. It's helpful for me, I don't know how your brain works, but it's helpful for me to kind of go, oh, there's 6 parts and we're at number 4. You know, it's like, gives me encouragement. So I'll just tell you, we're in 6-point map here, number 4. I'll show you on the next slide. But here was the last one. The precursor, which is what they call kind of the warm-up, we're getting ready to go into winter, was World War I. That was a pretty crummy precursor, World War I. Catalyst that sent us into true winter was the Great Depression of 1929. They call something that happens in the middle the regeneracy. It's a difficult word. It just means we find a way to kind of try to come together. Here it was under FDR, where he came into power to say, look, we need to take care of each other. There's going to be a different approach. There's going to be a different social contract. So there's sort of a temporary coming together of values, but then we're still fighting as a country. Fighting, fighting, fighting. Don't want to go into World War II. Pearl Harbor happens. Boom, consolidation of opinion happens. All right, climax happened on June 6th. D-Day, 1944, began the climax in Europe, and of course, the atomic bombings in Japan to conclude that very ugly period of time. And then the resolution was clear victory, the establishment of the United Nations, creation of the World Bank, and the US assuming a role as world leader. So now you have the map. Where are we? All right, I've said we're at winter, which began, according to them, in 2008. The precursor, here we got 6 parts, some people say 7 because they count 2 subsections here. The precursor was September 11th. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It was a horrible shock to the system. September 11th, 2001. So we're not really in winter yet, but we're kind of getting into it. We're on the on-ramp to winter. 2008, the global financial crisis, and I would add the election of Barack Obama, which brought the culture war raging into focus. Number 3, regeneracy. And we can't really describe for sure what the regeneracy is until we're looking backwards, but it's sort of a 2-part dance. Something splits us and something brings us together. Clearly the 2016 presidential election and the January 6th, 2020 thing that happened in DC, which most of us would call an insurrection, split the nation. And then part 2, something brings us together, at least momentarily, perhaps COVID. Then there is a consolidation moment because we're not really together. COVID didn't really get at the root cause of the separation in the culture. So what is the consolidation moment? Have we had it in Minnesota? Are we having it now with the file dumps? I'm not sure. We won't know until hindsight. But what can happen with 4, 5, and 6 is they can happen really quickly and surprisingly. So it may happen in February, this month. It may happen in 2027. We don't know, 2028. Hopefully no later than 2030 because I'm getting real tired, and I'm sure you are too. So we would love to have us turn to spring and a more hopeful, communal attitude. All right, so that's the end of part 1. All right. So the next segment today is based on this book, Spiral Dynamics, and I was taught by Dr. Don Beck and some of his associates certified in this method. I will tell you, I am giving you such an ridiculously simplified explanation of this model. Don is in heaven now, and he may be yelling at me today. So forgive me, you know, Don, I'm going to do the best I can. What I will tell you is there was a time when I taught this in more depth here at Unity in the sanctuary in 2005. That was filmed by a professional crew, 3-camera shoot, really nicely filmed. It's available now for free to everybody in the world. We've turned it free. At the bottom of your handout on the 3rd page is information, including a QR code you can scan to get you straight to that video playlist. It's in 4 parts. Parts 3 and 4 cover this model in more depth. Even that presentation is a simplification, but I think the simplification today is still helpful. It's like you can get the gist enough, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how it might impact us as people next week. So this is where I come back and I try to put in what I felt was missing from the 4 seasons model, the 4th turning, which is more of the human psychology and the evolutionary perspective. And this perspective, which was based on the work of Dr. Claire Graves, does include a spiritual component as well. So I think you will find that these two, the 4th turning and spiral dynamics, fit nicely together to give a bigger story of what is happening right now. So I've got some cool props, which I hope you will enjoy, and we will get started. This is the one I'm skipping, Marcelli, so you can skip this one. It was going to take too long. All right, so in the history of humans being on Earth, we have gone through stages of development where we focused on different things, and what Dr. Graves would say is our brain had to increasingly complexify to deal with the challenges that our species was facing in its environment. So one of the crucial factors of spiral dynamics is the challenges in your environment bring forth the response inside the human to increase complexity of our brains, to make more wiring possible, and to increase the complexity of our possible choices for responses. So we adapt to the life conditions. We evolve, we grow in response to the challenges that life throws at us. So this is his model and Don Beck's approximation of when these first show up. Each of these stages has a name, several names. It has a color. The colors have a system that will make sense if you work with it for a little while. But for now, I'm going to start as simple as possible and just go through very roughly when did these show up in human nature. All right, so humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, when did these show up? So beige is the bottom, and it's called survival consciousness. Its issue is to survive, and it arises when we arise, and we can all argue about when that was. 200,000, 250,000 years ago, whatever that was. So it arrives and it stays. You don't lose these. So here we come over to my cute little Russian doll set. This is our baby human species. It is beige. All right? We keep the baby, and then we go to the next stage of development, which is purple. And if you know how Russian nesting dolls work, this can go inside of this, right? So you can put the little beige baby inside of the purple one, right? So purple consciousness awakens about 50,000 years ago. It is associated with the development of larger groups. So here you're really in clans and small little survival pods. Here you're developing into larger tribes. You're developing early rituals and magical thinking associated with the movement of the stars and the sun. You may begin to bury your dead with rituals associated with that. Magical thinking is not a smackdown. That is a spiritual growth moment of understanding there's magic here. And indigenous people are still in touch with magic. So there's a shamanic energy to this. It's quite beautiful. So this tribal energy arises about 50,000 years ago, give or take. Next stage of development is called red. I'll get into these colors more in a little bit later. Red is about the ego and the self and feeling powerful and proving how powerful you are by conquering everybody else. So you build empires. So there's a transition from tribes to empires. Of course, empires like the Roman Empire, Genghis Khan, this sort of huge expansion of more and more and more and more enfolded, the British Empire being one of those. Now, empires eventually have to give way to some sense of rules and law and order, or they are dethroned, right? So eventually humans develop laws. The Code of Hammurabi is the first that we have documentation for, roughly that period of time ago. The major world religions all arise at this sort of blue period in history to set boundaries on human behavior. So here, he who has, and it's usually a he, who has the most power wins, takes over, conquers. Here we're trying to put some constraints on kings, queens, emperors, whatever. And some of those constraints come through the world religions. Not to say they're perfect and don't have issues of their own. They, of course, do. So you have all of this sort of law and order coming about to constrain the rule of kings. The rule of kings is still there, but there's some constraint on it. Around 500 years ago, you have the breakthrough revolution of the printing press, where everybody could get a copy of the Bible if they had a little money, which was a radical change in the power of the church because it helped the Protestant Reformation happen, which was a pretty big deal. You have the beginning of science, Galileo being imprisoned for saying awful rude things like the Earth is not the center of the solar system. Science trumps, sorry for that word, science overpowers belief system. I have to manage my vocabulary choices. So science wins out over superstition or church at this point. So we start getting this big breakthroughs in medicine, just beginning and then rolling. You get industrialization, and you get the American Revolution, because at this point in history, we're getting tired of kings, even when they're being managed by Parliament, because neither Parliament nor King George were doing right by the colonies, at least as far as the colonies felt. So you have this sort of pushback against that, both in the United States and in France, the American Revolution and the French Revolution, that says power to the people, people get to have a say. So that's really the first time that that idea starts to happen, is in this orange period. And so we have this long industrialization, capitalism, all of those things have excesses and ways in which they can go very toxic, which then help us awaken into the next level. So what you find is each of these levels brings gifts, and each of these levels brings problems, right? So orange excess, you can see very easily, I'm sure, capitalism can go nuts and really start accumulating all the wealth unto a few people. There was no protection for workers' rights. There was no concern about health and safety of employees. And so there's a pushback and an awakening starts happening around people of all classes matter. And also, by the way, animals matter. We are polluting these ecosystems. We are poisoning the water. We are poisoning the air. We are exterminating whole species. This is not okay. So you get this awakening about 150 years ago, we can argue when it happens, where green starts to come online and we become sensitive to the rights of people who normally have been excluded from having any rights, and we become sensitive to the rights of animals and concerned about the systemic impact on ecologies. Does this make sense as a human history? An evolutionary track? Yeah, okay. Now, another way to look at it is to see it kind of in a stair-step way with a gap in the middle. And we're going to get to my cool little stair-step model here eventually. But here we have each of these being a step up, incorporating, like the Russian dolls, the stages before. But there's this big gap that was identified by Claire Graves between green and yellow. And he called it second tier. Like, these are the first tier. And what he noticed when he interviewed people who were dominantly centered here, because as a child is born, we have to go through all these stages. You're born at beige, and you have to grow through purple childhood and red rebellion as a teenager, and you know, finding a way into adulthood with some minimal obedience to the laws, and orange achiever, and green caring about other people. But then there is this big gap, and this is actually the gap I think we're experiencing right now, is between green and yellow. He called this first 6 the first tier of the staircase, all right? So at some point, this is where my attempt at a top-heavy model might be helpful. We have beige, and then you step up to purple, and then red, and then blue, and then orange, and then green, and then there's an extra wide step here at yellow, and that's the second tier step. Now, the second tier, it's really hard for me to do this because it wants to fall over, but yellow is ideally positioned directly above beige. So yellow is repeating the survival issues of beige. Climate change is our survival issue. All right, does this make sense? This is going to be a big part of what motivates us to think, ooh, we have got to find a different way to interact with each other in the world. Because if we just keep throwing capitalism at the problem with extractive resource management, we are not going to get out of this in a very good shape. So it's not to say I want to throw capitalism totally under the bus. It's like each thing brings gifts, each thing brings problems. How do we manage the problems, right? So we are here at the step above beige, trying to make this transition from green to yellow. And it's a very big step. So the step that he described was that the first tier is very fear-driven. The second tier seems to lose most or all of its fear, which is weird. Now, I'm not a fan of losing all of it. Like, don't step in front of a bus because you have no fear, right? I think there's a certain level of beige reality that is a good thing to pay attention to. Do not step in front of a moving bus. However, what could it mean? It's a small me fear, I think, that is embodied in the first tiers. And that you get up here, and there's more of a willingness to see the whole, the interconnectedness of all life, and the smallness of one, and the beauty of the many, and the system. So it's like that sort of spiritual moment you have sometimes when you meditate, when you get it, that you're eternal, and you get it, that we're all connected, and at some level there's only one of us here, and who am I fighting with? I'm fighting with myself. I am not having a lot of fun with this. Maybe there's another way. Those little snap moments of transcendent awareness is where spirituality starts to come in at this level as well. So in addition to describing loss of fear and this profound sense of spirituality and interconnection, he saw a tremendous leap forward in complexity of thinking and systems thinking. So next week we're going to be talking about those two as things that we can actively work on, as well as doing our spiritual work. Does that kind of make some sense? All right. So let me talk a little bit more about each of these ideas. One of the beautiful things of spiral dynamics is the way the colors are memory aids, which I'll get into in a minute. Beige symbolizes something, red symbolizes, but all of the ones on the left are warm colors, and all the ones on the right are cool colors. That was done on purpose to help us remember that there's a polarity at play here. Do I express myself and what I want and fight for me, or do I sacrifice myself for the good of the group? And what's the answer? Both, of course, the answer is both. And you need a pulse between them. And so like so many things that are framed as either or questions, that's the wrong frame. It's a both and. And so in a way, our neurological development and our stages of personal growth take turns going over here to self-sacrificing and then expressing myself. To heck with you for a moment. I'm going to be about me for this moment. Okay, now back over here, conform to the group. Okay, now over here, I'm going to achieve and go, he who dies with the most toys wins. That's kind of the theme of Orange. Whoever dies with the most toys wins. And then I'm going to go back over here to be self-sacrificing and take care of the planet. And at some point, you get up here, and that oscillation feels more like a both and, like you get it. So the polarity is held as a simultaneous truth. So that's a big step up here. All right. I'm going to skip this one because I'm kind of covering it in the next slide. So I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. Let's take a deeper look a little bit at each color. This is beige. Its issue is surviving. Now you can imagine the very early hominids living wherever they were living was fighting for survival against other hominids. There was a time when there were many hominid species on the planet, and they're fighting for survival against mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and whatever else was here at the time. So survival involved really taking care of the clan, the group, and hunting together and fighting against whatever they needed to fight and resourcing things together, whether it's firewood or whatever. We don't have that same level of survival in the United States most of the time. In the US, in our politics now, we do have very real survival issues. They're just different. Beige in politics right now is often around food access and food assistance and healthcare access. It is life and death for many people if they lose their insurance now. They can't pay for their surgeries, they can't pay for their medications for themselves or their loved ones. This is survival level stuff. We never lose that little beige doll over there. We always have that. And we should always have that so that when life confronts us with survival level issues, we remember how to fight. I think this is why so many people have focused on going off the grid. There's some kind of sense of, I need to be able to survive without being dependent upon this very complicated food delivery system, which is unfair, broken, whatever, okay? Other ways it can show up: access to jobs, no job, no money, can't buy things, housing issues, etc. The color was selected because beige is the color of a desert in the dry season, so that's a tough survival environment. Purple, its issue is staying safe. One of the ways we achieve psychological as well as physical safety is to have a tribe. So if you think about indigenous peoples who had tribal support structures, those were essential to get through winters, droughts, difficulties with hunting seasons, and so on. Now it's more of an identity thing in the United States. My tribe is my political party. My tribe is my religion. My tribe is my, pick your thing. The color of my skin. We have a, yeah, my tribe is my whiteness, you know. Finding other forms of tribe is actually really healthy. I had a wonderful professor in college who had written a book. He was an English professor. I was in his poetry class, but he was talking about sports all the time, which made me crazy because I didn't like sports. But he was always talking about sports, and I asked him about it one day, and he said, "You don't understand how important sports are to channeling the urge to fight. It takes the tribal competition energy and puts it in a safer space where we can paint our faces and yell and scream at each other and throw a ball around and then declare victory or whatever, and we've gotten it out of our system." And I thought, all right, that's probably the best excuse I've heard for sports. I'm still not a big sports fan, but you know, I try. It creates a beautiful sense of connection. Now, there's a way I can identify with tribe, which is when I first found unity. So when I had left the church of my upbringing, I searched for a long time for a new church home, and I found a unity church, and I went, oh, these are my people. So I had a sense of identity with a group of people who shared like-minded ideas, and it was great, and we could have potluck dinners together, and it was wonderful. So having a sense of community is important, and I think that's something when we think into the new spring, what is the new spring going to look like? How can we find healthy tribal identity that is not about hating each other? It's not about what we're against, but what we are for, and maybe we can be for some stuff together, you know? So that's some thoughts. Red, very important stage. It's the stage when we move from childhood, which is very magical and purple, so like Disney movies, you know? Beautiful stuff that you grew up when I grew up with Tinkerbell, and fairy dust and whatever floating around. The magic that you understand the world as a child gives way to the understanding of middle school and the difficulty of the cafeteria and who's sitting at which table and who's bullying whom. Power becomes important, and you have a tribe. You're either in the jocks or you're in the nerds or you're in the whatever groups, but you also need to stand up to bullies who are using this sort of sense of personal power to just shove people around. Now, bullies can stay bullies till they die, right? And people can always revert to bullying, especially under threat and distress. But what is the positive aspect of red? Because each of these has positive aspects. Red is the ego finding its voice. Like, I'm a child and I'm kind of subsumed in the family system, but then as a teenager, I start driving my parents crazy, and that is my job, right? Is to separate, individuate, become a person. And the failure to separate and individuate creates a whole host of other problems. But you can develop your red in a way that is healthy, or you can develop your red in a way that is bullying and toxic and mean, right? So healthy red, healthy use of power, means you set good boundaries. You stand for stuff that you need to stand for. And so one of the challenges as you get up here to green, and I'll revisit this again in a minute, is we get up here to green and we want to be all peace, love, and granola. And we don't want to have power over anything because it feels yucky. There comes a time to say no, and to say no and mean it, and it doesn't have to be violent. And I think that's a lot of what winter may be teaching us right now, is that those of us who are center of gravity green have to rediscover our red, not in a way that is cruel and violent, but in a way that no means no. And not only that, sometimes it means heck no. Heck no. So it's the warrior energy. It brings individuation, courage, and heroism. In its toxic form, it's Game of Thrones. So that has been human history. We've had a lot of Game of Thrones history in this human evolutionary journey. We're hopefully beyond it. If you don't own your power, you don't own your agency. We need to have a voice in this world, so we need to reclaim our red. Blue is finding order from chaos. So red is the age of empires, the age of unrestrained power, where people's lives are meaningless and those in authority can take their lives just on a whim, that people are bought and sold, that nations are conquered, cities are burned. Humanity hits a tipping point and says, no more, we need laws. And so slowly, over thousands of years, we evolve laws to constrain power. Now, laws only work if we collectively make them work, right? So the laws that have constrained power in our country have gotten weaker, and that's creating a lot of anxiety, as it should. So coming back in to reclaim our healthy blue is also a challenge for green, because green tends to be peace, love, and granola. Everybody gets to do their own thing. You can believe whatever you want. I don't want to tell you what to believe. And that beautiful open-heartedness can also create a feeling of being easy to just mow you down because you don't stand for anything. So what do we stand for, and what is our blue? Blue backed up by red. It's part of our evolutionary journey, I think, right now. It shows up in strong leadership, the rule of law, healthy forms of policing, healthy, underlined forms of policing, healthy justice systems, healthy faith groups. Anything can be turned toxic, so any faith group can become excessive. So it's known as a sacrificing self color, and it sacrifices for the good of the whole. Orange, known as the achiever. The idea here is that it's molten steel is the mnemonic device. So I didn't tell you, I should back up. The mnemonic device for red is blood. This is the most bloodshed-prone stage of the spiral. So that helps you remember that. Blue, most police officers are for some reason in blue uniforms. I find that interesting. But it's also the sky gods, the sky is blue. So the evolution of the world religions. So law and order and major world religions. That's how you can remember that. Molten steel reminds us of industrialization, capitalism, science, and democracy, all of which arise during this stage. It's a me color. It's one of those warm colors. It's all about my achievement. How many companies can I own? How many yachts can I buy? How many toys can I accumulate? Its toxic expression is overaccumulation. Its impact on the environment is clear. So when we overconsume, we damage the environment. But this arises before we know that. This arises at a time when not enough people had enough stuff, and mass manufacturing was a godsend when people could buy more than one piece of clothing and have multiple pieces of clothing and then be able to wash their clothes, which improved hygiene, which improved health. So there were things that were fantastic. Science came, germ theory came, penicillin was discovered, lots of good things happen at Orange. All right, but then comes the need for green, which is really kind of mostly, I think, the center of gravity of this group of people here. Eco-conscious, conscious of many things about our history, including the history of colonization, of enslavement, class oppression, every kind of caste system you can think of, sensitive to the pain of all beings, and does focus on climate change and the extinction of species, and cares about natural interconnected systems. So systems thinking begins to really come on board here. Orange is capable of systems thinking in terms of debugging a manufacturing process. Green thinks about systems as clean water, clean air, and all the things in which we are interconnected in that way. All right, we're getting close to where we can do Q&A. Why do each of these groups fight? How do they justify fighting? Well, let's start with the bottom. Beige fights to survive. Purple fights to protect their tribe, to protect their myths, their sacred ways, their sacred places. If you try to conquer a tribe's most sacred burial grounds or sacred worship centers, they will fight and fight and fight because that is so core to their identity. Red fights to have the biggest empire. We want the most money, we want the most space. Blue fights to protect their nation or their homeland. Blue is the arising of nation states. Orange fights to advance their economic sphere of influence. Anybody ever heard that? Scarce resources, precious minerals, oil, things that are important to the economic engines of the world. They will fight. So you get corporate states. And then green will fight to punish people who have committed crimes against humanity, crimes against the environment, and protect the victims. All right, so everybody will fight, just for different reasons. Now, let me see. Do I want to talk about this? No, I think we've talked about that enough. Let's go to that one. Green to yellow. This is where we are. This is a difficult transition, and I think it's going to be the success-failure criteria for our move from this winter to our next spring. Can enough of us, it doesn't have to be all of us, can enough of us make the move from green to yellow? And that's a question to be posed to people who are already center of gravity green. Now, I've got notes in your handout that will help you remember what I've told you today. and give you some more information about stages of development. You cannot skip a stage. You can't take somebody whose center of gravity blue and say, we're going to make you yellow and it's going to be a weekend retreat. Does not work. It's many years to go each step here. And it is the hardest of all to make the green to yellow transition. But that doesn't mean we can't learn stuff next weekend, Sunday, 12:30 to 2:30, that will help you be more full at orange and green and develop the stepping stones to yellow. It takes practice to integrate this stuff. But why is it so hard? It's hard in part because green, just like all the other tier 1 stages, is so full of self-righteousness. We are convinced we're right, and this is the engine behind cancel culture and the culture wars. This is why so many people who have not yet owned the programming they received as a white person, and I will speak for myself, it was very hard to acknowledge how profoundly I had been lied to, and to sit with and cry over what had been transmitted to me by well-meaning people who were profoundly wrong in what they taught me, profoundly wrong. And to seek to reprogram myself meant catching every moment of that garbage coming up between my ears and sitting with it and trying to rewrite the program. Because I want to be the programmer now. I don't want to be run by programming that was inherited by my parents who had got it from their parents who got it from their parents. So how do we as green clean up not only what we inherited, but stop being mean to the people who haven't done that work yet and invite them into the journey too. And that's hard. Let me tell you, it's hard. I get judgy. I get angry. I want to say snarky things to people who are just so ignorant, you know, like, "Arr." But that doesn't help, doesn't get the thing done, doesn't help create the future I want to see. So owning our own self-righteousness here is part of how we make this giant leap, softening not to diminish our values or give them up, but to hold them in love, in a love thy neighbor and love thyself kind of energy. You know, how do we love everybody? Green is also tending to be obnoxious because it is so highly educated, not always, but often, and therefore thinks it really, truly knows better. So yellow requires a tremendous amount of inner cleanup. Clean up your programming, clean up your shadow, clean up the stuff you haven't owned about yourself in order to, you know, move from here to here. And in here, we have to develop the ability to hold the both end, the complexity that we're going to talk about next week. What is the color yellow? It's the color of sunshine, which my mother used to always say is a great disinfectant. Sunshine is a great disinfectant. It's putting a clear light, clear seeing on many things that we need to see. It handles ambiguity. It is head and heart, with head dominant. It has competency as its goal in determining leadership, and it's also really good at sharing leadership. It's not about the heroic Superman model of one leader coming in. It's a collective leadership that is shared. It's often referred to as flex flow, and so it flexes and flows with what is needed. I step into leadership on this, and Stacy steps into leadership on something else, and Michael steps in on something else, and you step in on something else. We share leadership where competency is strongest. We are aligned by our true north values. We know what we care about. Turquoise is the color of the planet seen from space. It is the color of our oceans. Our oceans connect everything to everything. The illusion of separateness breaks at turquoise. And at this point, it's a sacrifice myself now, but not in a throw myself on a bonfire kind of way. It's sacrificing myself now to maintain the quality of life for all beings today and in the future. Graves believes this is where spirituality truly integrates into the spiral. It's not that it's not present before, but this is where spirituality comes truly alive, truly embodied, and we live it, including in our artificial intelligence technologies and whatever else is out there, so that it's no longer an orange level implementation of technology, but a truly holistic level of implementation. All right, so what's the conclusion? Congratulations, you're on planet Earth. You signed up for this tour. This roller coaster is currently operating at high speed, upside down, and you're probably queasy. That's okay. The cycle is a cycle. Spring is coming. And we are each here, I believe, to be part of the solution. There's a song in Hamilton, if you ever saw Hamilton on Broadway, or if you saw it on Disney Plus when it came out on Disney Plus, how lucky we are to be alive right now in New York, because the revolution is coming. How lucky we are to be alive right now because spring is almost here, but it hasn't formed yet. Chaos turns to order through islands of coherence, and we are an island of coherence. Each one of you individually, and we as a church are an island of coherence. And it is the coherence, the vibration, the energy, the love, the complexity that we hold that will be one rock in the stream that helps to steer this thing. We're not the whole answer, but I don't want to abdicate my role either. So that's the presentation for today. We can. Thank you.